everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Again, I'm Chris Levin. I'm Vice President of EIG. We are a bipartisan research and advocacy organization. We're focused on regional inequality and investment issues. So naturally, opportunity zones and its successful implementation is a key priority for us. This webinar is the first of what we envision to be a series that we will host in the coming months. Thank you again for joining us today. But following the webinar, we'd value your input and suggestions on opportunity zone topics that we should consider covering in the coming months. So please do take some time to do that, following the webinar in the coming days. But today we want to address some of the current issues and updates around the opportunity zone regulatory process, but also to share insights from the field and some of the emerging projects that align with the intent of opportunity zones and really speak to its transformational potential. So I'm going to hand it back over to Catherine, our Manager of Policy and Coalitions, and she'll be followed by Rachel Riley, who is our Director of Impact Investing. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. Everyone should be muted just for the purpose of keeping this call orderly. We have quite a large audience, which we're really excited about. But to unmute at any point, we will have a Q&A session at the end. It's *6 to unmute. And then, right now. You guys got it. We did figure out how to unmute. Okay.
Awesome.
So in addition, we're going to have a chat box that you should be able to see, and you feel free to use that throughout the webinar to put your questions there. Sometimes that's an easier way for us to keep track of that, and then we will aim to get to the majority of those or all of them, hopefully, before the end of the call. All right, so with that, I will move on. So again, this is everyone who will be joining us today on today's call. So we asked in the registration process for a little bit of information about your knowledge of opportunity zones, and there was quite a range, so we felt like it would be helpful to go through kind of some of the basics on the incentive and how it works. We won't spend too much time on this, but this is also, these slides will be distributed as a resource, so hopefully these will come in handy as you continue to learn more about this. So essentially, opportunity zones provides an incentive to unlock capital gains for investment into distressed communities across the country. So essentially, any individual or corporation who has capital gains that are realized within 180 days, they would put that into an opportunity fund, which is the kind of critical vehicle and it's necessary to put capital into in order to invest into these opportunity zones and reap the tax benefit. There's a number of kind of qualified investments that are possible with opportunity zones. The first is stock of a qualified opportunity zone corporation. I believe that has to be newly issued stock. Interest in a qualified opportunity zone partnership, and finally also tangible property used in qualified opportunity zones. One important thing to note is that opportunity zones are equity investments. So that sets it apart a bit from the kind of traditional community development tools that are often more focused on debt financing. So this, we hope, will provide a useful tool in some of these projects that require some additional types of financing to help kind of be part of the capital stack and hopefully help close some of the financing gaps that often exist. There we go. So these incentives are also designed to move investment. So essentially there are three different buckets, as we like to think of them, of the benefits that are offered by the tax incentive. The first is a temporary deferral. So just by way of putting your capital gains into an opportunity fund, you will get a temporary deferral on the payment of those of the taxes on those gains until the end of 2026. So that in and of itself is a benefit. Then there will be a step up in basis. So if you hold those capital gains into an opportunity fund and qualified investments, you will receive a reduction of 10% for after 5 years, and another 5%, so a total of 15% if held for 7 years. As you can see, this is really designed to help or to foster patient capital and really invest in these communities for the long term and think through investment strategies, with a longer view. And finally, and this really kind of comes into play, especially with the last the permitted exclusion. So any capital gains on subsequent investments made through an opportunity fund would accrue tax-free. Again, as long as the investor stays invested in the fund for at least 10 years. So again, kind of any gain that you make on your initial investment would be tax-free if kept in an opportunity fund for 10 years. So the next slide shows just a kind of the long tail investment, as I mentioned. This is something that is meant to incentivize patient capital. So you can kind of see here just a timeline of events when your taxes must be realized, as well as kind of the end of the beginning of the 10-year disposal window and the end of the window that was at least currently proposed in the first round of regulations, and we'll get to that in a bit. So again, hopefully I'm not going to go into this too much more detail, but hopefully this will be a resource for you all. So as I mentioned, opportunity funds are the critical intermediary here. All investments must be made through these funds in order for it to qualify for the benefits that we just mentioned. It is also meant to encourage broad participation. There's really just a process of self-certification in order for your fund to become an opportunity fund in the eyes of the IRS. The private sector is responsible for establishing opportunity funds. And the one kind of main qualification for opportunity funds is that at least 90% of the capital within them must be invested into qualified opportunity zone, property, stock, partnership, et cetera, at any point in time, and they will be audited twice yearly to ensure that. So that is something that is required and meant to ensure that the capital is truly going to these communities that need it. We anticipate that opportunity funds will mature in kind of a variety of ways and look very different. It's meant to be, as I mentioned, kind of broadly participatory, but also very flexible, meant to kind of meet community needs as well. So right now we're seeing a lot of kind of single investor, single project funds, and that's a bit of a product of the regulatory framework that we have today. But we certainly anticipate these funds to mature into multi-asset and multi-investor vehicles as well. And that is certainly the intent behind the funds by Congress. So just a quick update on the regulations. This is, I think, top of mind for most people in this space. And so wanted to kind of hopefully address some of the questions about this early on. So the first round came out in October of 2018. The public had 60 days to comment on the regulations, and actually about 175 people or organizations did so. So that was great to see kind of the level of participation and interest in this. It also, I think everyone really coalesced around some of the similar ideas and needs from the marketplace as well. So it was good to see kind of that everyone was on more or less the same page. So the regulations did a few things which I list here. I won't go into too much detail, but we do need some additional clarification. So we'll be watching the second round of regulations, which should be coming in the next couple of weeks. That's what somebody high up at Treasury just said publicly at an event that earlier this week. He said it would be coming in the next couple of weeks. So we will certainly be looking out for that and looking for clarification on a few additional key issues, which I've listed here. But essentially what we're looking for is that the ability for these funds to truly act like funds, to create a diverse portfolio of investments, especially business investments. That's one thing that we're not seeing a lot of market activity around, and that's really because the regulations have not kind of opened the door for that. So we really want to make sure that that these funds are able to deploy their capital with some flexibility around timing, to be able to, have additional guidance on how to exit funds, how to reinvest their capital if their asset or their investment is acquired or bought or sold, et cetera. So these are all really critical questions that investors are asking, and we're hopeful that the second round of regulations will address. We have a lot of content to keep going through, so I will stop there. I'm always happy to answer additional questions. I will take a look at the chat box now. I'm sorry I wasn't doing that as I was talking, but and I will turn it over to Rachel to take us through a bit more about what we're seeing in the marketplace and across the country.
Yeah, thanks so much, Catherine. And I just wanted to share that we have a lot of hyperlinks in this webinar, and once we've concluded, we'll make this available on our website so you can click through those hyperlinks, and we don't spend too much time today on the specifics, but wanted to provide those as resources. So would love to kick it off by talking about opportunity funds and what we're seeing out there. As we're still waiting on some final rules, a second tranche of proposed regulations, as Catherine mentioned, but there is a lot of activity already happening in the market. And that's illustrated by really two directories that are being tracked. One through Novogradac, so the Novogradac Opportunity Zones Fund listing, which we just did a quick snippet so you can see what that looks like on that slide, as well as NCSHA has also been keeping a list of funds, and these are all either opt-in or monitored. This is in no way comprehensive of the entirety of investments happening in the marketplace today. But what we have seen just from Novogradac's listing of 87 funds is an aggregate of 20 billion in capital being either contemplated to be raised, but these funds have said that they intend to launch and raise an aggregate of nearly 20 billion in opportunity fund investment. So that's just to give you a right size of what this market looks like right now. We're seeing some specialized funds forming. So there's funds that are national in scope. There's thematic funds, so focused on specific asset classes, but also we're seeing funds that are focused on rural. So wanted to highlight some of those there. Rural Colorado Opportunity Fund, the Emergent Fund, is focused in the southeast along Main Street developments. Out of the Kresge and Calvert incubator, there was an HBCU Opportunity Fund recently launched, as well as the Teachers Village Opportunity Fund, which is modeled after the Teachers Village in Newark, New Jersey. And this was just announced 2 weeks ago that they're going to try to replicate that model in cities throughout the nation. And I can talk a little bit more about that shortly. And we're also seeing states try to create marketplaces to connect investors to deals. So marketplaces, exchanges, what have you, but wanted to give you some examples of how states are moving forward there. So again, the hyperlinks will be provided once we conclude the webinar over the next couple of days, so you can take a look at those as resources. And what we truly are seeing is that opportunity zones as a tax benefit, a tax incentive, is changing investor behavior and is additive to some of the deals that it's being leveraged for. So earlier, I just mentioned the Teachers Village in Newark. We have a quote from an investor that has now invested into this new opportunity fund with its intention of doing its first investment in Miami and underwriting a second investment in Atlanta at the moment. But this is, truly from the investor saying that this investment opportunity is directly in line with his family's values, and that education is at the core of it. And so they're leveraging the opportunities and benefit to make their investment matter for the causes that they care about. In Cleveland, we have another development, which the quote that is provided there just speaks to the fact that this team, the local developer Sustainable Communities Associates, which has done a number of projects in this community, they are raising opportunity fund equity for a new mixed-use, mixed-income rental property, with the retail space on the first floor being for a local entrepreneur that is going to launch a bakery. But what's really exciting is that 60% of the apartments that are going to be available are going to be affordable at workforce rents. And what this quote is saying is that Sustainable Communities Associates is saying that the tax benefit has relieved and provided a little bit of relief around the capital stack, which allows them to offer lower rents to renters, and that is how they are able to do this in an unsubsidized way, provide workforce affordable housing for this community. And then as we look across the nation, so outside of what the private market's doing with opportunity funds and specific deals, we're seeing a lot of states and cities respond to opportunity zones as either a catalyst to review economic development strategies, to create an opportunity zone framework, and there's different efforts and initiatives to attract capital, but also to ensure that opportunity zone capital, once it hits communities, is being invested in a way that's going to foster long-term equitable economic growth. And so I wanted to just share a few examples here. There are a number of cities and states that have either moved forward with or contemplating opportunity zone task force to advise on different activities to engage in. Maryland and the state of Maryland and the city of Pine Bluff in Arkansas are two examples of that. A number of states that are considering tax credits, and I also know that there's some discussion around conformity with IRC, so ensuring that the state or the federal benefit is replicated at the state level to ensure that states are competitive for this investment. And really, the best resource here, I think, is the Novogradac website if you're looking for more information. And in fact, Novogradac did a great blog on this on April 1st, so would point you there. And then there's different kinds of incentives to attract businesses. So you see West Virginia provided an exemption of income tax for 10 years for any new opportunity zone or QOZ businesses that are moving into West Virginia. So a way to attract business, attract investment into West Virginia. You see states aligning this with their low-income housing tax credit, finance projects and state historic tax credits, and just in general aligning state resources writ large. And then you also see states contemplating regulatory relief. I continue to hear a lot of discussion around expedited permitting, expedited entitlement process, and what that can really mean as far as getting investors comfortable and getting investment into communities. We have seen locally funded technical assistance, as well as the announcement last week around Washington, D.C. creating an OZ community court, which basically is providing free legal services for eligible opportunity zone activities. So those would be some great resources to look at. And then as far as fostering equitable economic growth, a lot of this is ensuring that solving for any concern around displacement and ensuring that investments are aligned with local needs and benefits. And so some examples of what folks are thinking of or engaged in is, how do you leverage your city-owned assets, your property, in order to attract capital that helps to preserve affordable housing and workspace? How are you creating sustainable streams of revenue to potentially catalyze or capitalize a fund that can help provide capital for anti-displacement activities? Looking at your toolbox that you have already, if you're at work at the city and local level around tax abatement, inclusionary zoning, first right of refusal, how are you leveraging those or applying those? And then, of course, I just wanted to highlight that site control is critical for just the general additive value around wealth creation over the long term. So having rapid response site acquisition funds or facilities like we're seeing different states think about, and there's past precedent for this across the nation, but basically pools of capital that folks can tap into in order to acquire land and opportunity zones that may be otherwise purchased by speculative investment, I think is going to be really important. And then in addition to that, we have just local initiatives happening. I really want to highlight the success around the idea of creating a prospectus. More than 25 cities from across the nation have created what folks are calling an opportunity zone investment prospectus. This is a screenshot from Kansas City, Missouri's prospectus that really talks about their process for local engagement. And then you're seeing different community organizations really grab the wheel and say, we're going to quarterback this effort for our communities. So some examples there in Miami, but as also want to highlight efforts in Minnesota and in Utah, and of course Alabama we'll hear from very shortly. Some technology platforms want to highlight the Opportunity Exchange, who we'll also hear from shortly, as well as initiatives to ensure that opportunity zone investments are, to the extent it's desirable, framed within some impact outcomes, including the impact framework, which was launched last month, that looks at sort of a private sector approach to measuring impact, as well as the fund manager incubator that is providing technical assistance and back office services to fund managers looking to do investments that go above and beyond what's currently required through statute and regulation. And with that, I think it's a great time to maybe turn it over to Alex at Opportunity Alabama to talk about what he's been doing in the state and what he's seeing from his purview.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And I'm hoping that I'm actually officially unmuted, that y'all can hear me.
You are.
I appreciate the wonderful. I appreciate the description on the last slide, Rachel. Ecosystem building by third-party entities. If we add catalytic and synergistic somewhere in there, I think that we will have hit every buzzword in our description of Opportunity Alabama. But don't get too excited. We're a 6-month-old organization that happened to be one of the first movers in the Opportunity Zone space. Really because of the slide that you're about to see as Catherine transitions onto it, which is that we here in Alabama have a lot of competition from those of you who are, I'm sure, on the phone right now. So if you're in one of these places that's listed on our national map, we thank you, because this was what we started showing to a whole lot of people in Birmingham, Montgomery, Huntsville, Mobile, and places that are a lot more rural than that you've probably never heard of, to say, look, folks, this is a national program, this Opportunity Zones program. And unless we early on decide to start aggregating deal flow, decide to start mobilizing communities at the local level, and decide to start really building a framework for how we're measuring and tracking the impact of the investments that we're receiving, then there's a very good chance we will not be invested in at all, and that the vast majority of the capital will, as we all know, flow to the places where the channels are already dug. So how do we, in essence, dig the channels to the places that are not on this map, to the places like Fayette, Alabama, or suburbs of Birmingham that have been historically underinvested, like Avondale or Eastlake. So if you go on to the next slide, we have been thinking in Alabama really since March, April of last year, after the zones were designated, about how we can build a statewide ecosystem that attracts both national investors and I think that, more importantly, gets local investors potentially off the sidelines using this new tool, so that we can sustain investment in Alabama and in our projects beyond just, the next couple of years and really over the course of the next decade. And if you jump onto the next slide, that ecosystem that you see us talk about, that's really here. And I guess I should sort of preface this by saying that Alabama is a place, I would say probably unlike a lot of you on the phone, that has historically been underinvested from a community, from sort of a community development perspective. We have really only one community development entity that's received New Markets tax credit allocation since 2007. We don't have a whole lot of statewide CDFIs. Most of those that operating here from other places. And so our community development infrastructure was sort of, it wasn't as well formed as those of us who are in the community development space wanted it to be. And So we saw the opportunity to rally these 4 groups together to create an ecosystem around this new tool, and decided to seize upon it, not just because of the value that opportunity zones could create, but I think more importantly because of the community organizing and capacity building value that could be added just by getting these people together. And opportunity zones happen to be the excuse that we use to get them in the room, and it's worked out beautifully so far. So our ecosystem so far is comprised of, I'd say, the 4 points of the compass that you see around the circle here. You know, the North Star, the most important piece, are the communities themselves. So we're working directly with just about 95% of Alabama communities right now, helping them think through what the opportunity zone process looks like and getting directly engaged. The western side of the compass are our project sponsors. They're folks who, both on the real estate side and hopefully in the next 15 to 20 days on the active business side, have investable projects or purchasable land or investable business ideas. On the eastern side of the compass are our investors. So they're local folks and national folks. And we're very interested in getting both into our ecosystem. I'd say that we've had success in both places, but I'd say that just given the sort of the national scope of this program, we've seen more success at the national level so far. Have developed relationships with, probably a couple dozen at this point, big national opportunity funds looking to deploy capital to the projects we have in pipeline. And then finally, our institutional supporters. So I would say this group is probably the least thought about, but yet most important group as you're thinking about building an ecosystem around opportunity zones, because the folks that are in this category are the ones that are ultimately going to make the whole thing work. So they're the banks that are providing the leverage for all these deals, and that need to understand deal structures if they're going to do so. They're the accountants that are not just papering the deals, but that in a lot of places know where the gain is buried, which is very helpful. They're the utilities that can provide, not just fiber or water to your project, but they could also provide potential support for your local organizing efforts. Their local foundations, their colleges and universities, all the people that can bring aligned knowledge and skills to bear in bringing these 4 groups together and then structuring them so that they can get catalytic projects accomplished in your local communities. So the first question is, how do you actually get all these folks to the table? Because this is a lot of people. And to us, the answer has been education. Everyone, that's why we've got, 146 folks on this webinar. There is never enough education that you can do on this program, especially because the rules are always evolving. And as you heard from Rachel, even those of us that follow this literally day in and day out are always learning stuff that's going on new across the country. So education then in turn leads to the development of pipeline, typically on the project side and on the investor side. So that is what we are using to build our marketplace here in Alabama. We've got about $200 million in existing deal flow coming in on the project side that we're trying to plug into various investors all over the U.S. and locally. But to do that, we need to help understand, or we need to help investors understand what they're investing in, and at the same time help communities understand that to attract investment at all, you need to be able to tell in 30 seconds or less a potential investor not just why you're a great place now, but why 10 years down the road that investor's dollar is going to be worth more than it is today, because that's the whole point of this incentive, right? So, and that's not, the answer to that question is not, oh, let me go pull our 300-page community, map plan off the shelf and dust it off and show you it. I need a 30-second answer, and I need to be able to internalize it, not just me on the north side of the compass, but all points of the compass, so that we can all be talking about and thinking about more critically, why our communities are going to be better places 10 years down the road. So I have promotion listed as a vertical here, but at the end of the day, really, it's not just promotion that has to occur to build an opportunity zone prospectus, as you heard Rachel talk about earlier. It's really community engagement and capacity building and having really intriguing conversations with all 4 points of the ecosystem, all sitting around the table about what we look like, not just now, but 10 years from now and how we get there. And then most importantly, at least for us, it's how do we measure and track the success or lack of success that we're seeing thanks to this tool. And that requires a level of data tracking that simply is, has been, at least to date, absent from both the statute and the regulations. And so, that's something that we're working critically on, and I think that Peter will be able to talk a lot more about. this is some fun stuff that we've been able to do so far. I can talk through sort of specifics, but at the end of the day, I think where we've seen success and the reason that we've been able to see success so far is because we've been able to work directly with communities to source projects at the local level that localities want, and really I think providing that education and getting engaged on a statewide basis has helped us to build a pipeline. Again, that $200 million pipeline, the reason we're able to do it is because it's a statewide effort, right? It's not just one community. And so regionalism, working with people around you to build out not just thought infrastructure around this, but actual pipeline to go to investors with, I think that's a critical next step going forward. But at the end of the day, for us, I think, where we've seen gaps in the ecosystem, it really is in actually making the connections with third parties. And before I get into this, I'm trying to tee up Peter one slide too early. Catherine, if you want to go on to the next slide, that'd be great. What I would suggest to all of you on the phone today is to think about these four things if you're on the community side, right? Or frankly, if you're any position in the ecosystem there locally. The first is you got to have some kind of a pipeline if you want to go to anyone with anything. So first thing is, how do you develop pipeline locally, and where do you put it? And that's a really critical question, because right now our pipeline literally lives on an Excel file on my computer. And that's not very helpful when it comes to trying to market to third-party investors. And I think that's something that Peter can talk about, very well, because he's about to be very helpful to us in that. The second is, who are your investors, right? Because at the end of the day, if I'm marketing a project, let's say, for example, in Macon County, Alabama, home of the Tuskegee Airmen, you might have heard of Tuskegee Airmen, but you probably not heard of Exit 38. But guess what? The guy down the road in Montgomery who's got a $750,000 gain event has. And if you're able to connect the guy down the road with the truck stop at Exit 38, then good things can happen. But you can only do that if you've got your locally sourced pipeline of investors. And then third, clearly, as Rachel suggested, you got to develop your local marketing documents if you want to have a chance at pushing this out nationally. And then finally, I would encourage all of you to think about within your communities, who owns the process of building the local ecosystem? Is it your chamber? Is it your city? Is it your county? Is it a regional entity? Or is it a brand new one that no one's even conceived of yet, that doesn't have any enemies yet, which is always a nice thing. So think about who owns that locally and how you can most efficiently scale up, because now, as we're waiting on the final version of the regs to come down, now is the time to build the framework to take this to the next level. And if, on the organizing side, we can do this all day long. We can build a pipeline of projects. We can build a pipeline of investors. But unless we're able to efficiently connect them and spare me from having to, do everything by email, phone, and other inefficient means of communication, then ultimately we're not going to get anywhere. And I'm hopeful that's what Peter can enlighten us on next.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex. I mean, I think we can all identify with Exit 38, right? Like, everyone has their own version of Exit 38, and I think that was really helpful in illustrating how you're connecting local deals with local capital, and the fact that opportunity zones is the lever point or the entry point to begin to have those conversations. So I think that that's really, you're doing amazing work. I know people tell you that all the time, but I'll leave it there, because what I do want to do is transition over to Peter from the Opportunity Exchange, because he's taking, these sorts of conversations and going online, right? So he's created this platform that allows these Exit 38 deals, which I may just start calling them Exit 38 deals, in addition to catalytic and synergistic Exit 38 deals. And he's providing more, I guess, airtime for them. I don't know, Peter, help me out here. What are you doing?
Yeah. Hey, so can folks hear me if I speak like this?
Yeah, you're good. Great.
Awesome, cool. Thanks everybody for having me on the phone. Rachel, Catherine, and Chris. It's always good to hear updates from you guys, and Alex. Thanks for teeing me up. So my name's Peter. I'm the founder of the Opportunity Exchange. I'm really excited to chat with you all on the phone here today, share a little bit about what we're working on, and some of the motivation behind the Opportunity Zone work that we're doing with Alex and a lot of the other communities that are starting to really push the needle forward here across the country. I created the Opportunity Exchange to really focus on a couple of key points that we've already touched on today, and will really help kind of, I think, the themes I'll touch on will build on a lot of the comments that were made earlier. The Opportunity Exchange, in a nutshell, we're a platform that helps connect project sponsors, investors, and community leaders with some online software. And for communities in particular, we really help out with some of the pieces that Alex was talking about around pipeline management, data tracking, and impact tracking at a local level, so you can have a better sense of what's going on, what's happening in your opportunity zones, what impact's been created, and how to use that data to iterate going forward. So I'll talk really briefly today about 3 quick things: why we exist, and why what kind of the inspiration was to starting the Opportunity Exchange, how we help out, and the different roles that we can play in various communities, and then how you can learn more, how you can work with us, and how you can get engaged. So here on this slide, you can see a little bit about some of the functions and roles that we perform. My background before working on the Opportunity Exchange was working in community economic development in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio, where I was working with a lot of communities, cities, counties across this region around building a local OZ strategy that, frankly, we were just trying to copy what Alex was doing in Alabama to a large part, which I think probably many people on the phone can associate with. But as I was working in that space, I started to see a bunch of common questions that communities across the country were asking, right? How do we build this local pipeline? How do we think about supporting local projects, local investors, local anchor institutions with this cohesive ecosystem that can help bring all the parties together? How do we market and showcase what we have to reach a national audience? And how do we think about tracking the impact of our work? Right? All of these questions are questions that I hear all the time and have heard for quite some time. And I realized that I was really motivated, to make a difference and help out with this. So as a function of that background, created the Opportunity Exchange. We're a small but mighty team based here in Cleveland, Ohio, and we help address some of the core challenges that Alex really laid out. So you can kind of see them going across the slide here, but so we help facilitate collaboration at a local level by creating a marketplace and a platform that brings together projects, investors, and communities in one place, so it makes it easier for them to collaborate. Second, we help grow the scale and visibility for a lot of that local work to help reach a bigger audience. And third, on the impact and data tracking side of things, as Alex mentioned, this is a really critical component that's not really, at the moment, part of the federal regulations around opportunity zones, but it's a really critical piece to ensuring that over the long term, whether at a particular project or community level, or nationally for opportunity zones as a whole, thinking about how you can start to track basic project data as well as social impact data as a way to talk about and measure what's actually happening. It's a really critical piece of the ecosystem, and it's one of the main pieces that the Opportunity Exchange helps out with. So Catherine, if you flip to the next slide. So at a high level, that's where we came from and how the Opportunity Exchange came to be. Specifically, there's 3 groups and three types of folks who we work with most commonly. And I imagine that many folks on the webinar today fall into one of these buckets. So I figured I would just take a quick moment to talk through each as a way to illustrate perhaps a little bit more specifically some of the ways in which we help advance these efforts that are happening on the ground. So starting on the left, we work with communities like Alex and Opportunity Alabama to perform a lot of those functions that we just talked about, right? Thinking about a process to streamline project intake, how to build local pipeline, how to create line of sight into pipeline that gives you some visibility around 6 months, 12 months, and 3 years down the road. What projects are really percolating in a community and what are ready to go now, what needs some more time. And then once you've built that pipeline, how do you showcase it and how do you track the impact? This is how we work with communities, and we provide a tool that really helps catalyze and enable that ecosystem that Alex described to work around a common tool, a common platform to achieve their local objectives. For folks who have projects and are considering going to market for opportunity zones. You know, the Opportunity Exchange is a tool that helps in a couple ways. You know, by virtue of being a marketplace that's working across the country, for projects that are on the platform, we help expand the visibility and reach of, you know, who might see your project. But also, I think just, you know, by providing a tool that's easy to use and has some of the kind of baseline features of, if I'm going to go try to get in front of some opportunity zone investors, or I think opportunity zones might be the right thing for me, you know, what do I need to start to put together for my project? That's a question that I hear a lot. And, you know, by virtue of having a platform that helps guide kind of that process, if you're not totally certain about how to showcase what you're working on, or you're not totally certain about what the elements of a project prospectus are that you start to put together, that's one way that, you know, through the evolution of the platform, we hope to be able to help folks who are looking to go to market here. Last is for folks who are looking to invest, whether it's the local investors who might be in Birmingham looking to support local projects, or some of the national funds that are looking to invest across the country. The hope here is that the Opportunity Exchange then creates a platform to allow either of those parties to more effectively and more efficiently find their ways to community-aligned, high-impact projects in geographies across the country. So for each of those different folks, that's some of the ways that we help out. To make it really clear, yep, please go to the next one. Thanks, Catherine. You're right on time. To make it really clear, so one of the partners we're working with is this group in Cleveland called Opportunity CLE. They recently, I believe about a week and a half ago, had some news in various press that you may have seen. But essentially, it's a collaboration very much along the lines of the ecosystem that Alex described. So you have you know, the city of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, the local Chamber of Commerce, the local New Market Tax Credit Organization, the local Land Bank, and local philanthropy, who have together created an initiative called Opportunity CLE, whose goal is to maximize high-impact community investment in Cleveland. We are working with to support the efforts of that group by providing essentially the project intake, project management, project showcasing, and data tracking capabilities that allow them to work proactively with local sponsors, build that community pipeline, and then go to market around those projects and use it as a tool to help talk with investors who might be interested in Cleveland and really help connect the dots on some of these local projects that are viable, have a high degree of community impact, and just really need as many channels as possible to get seen and get heard about. If you click, there's for folks later, the link to their profile on the site is on the bottom of that slide there. So if you flip to the next slide, so in wrapping up, so I think Alex said he's a 6-month-old organization. We have him beat by about half. We launched earlier this year. Opportunity zones are pretty new, and we're all finding our way in this space. But we're working both at a state level and at a city level across the country. We're supporting Alex's work, as he mentioned, in Alabama. I alluded to the work we're doing in Cleveland. We're also supporting, and Rachel mentioned earlier, some of the work in Minnesota that's going on. We're supporting those efforts at a state level. And also on the early phases of supporting some pilots out in the greater Portland area in Oregon. Similarly, we've talked about impact and the importance of impact and data tracking. We're working with a lot of organizations who are kind of thought leaders at a national level and really pushing the conversation around whether it be the Opportunity Zone impact framework that was spoken about earlier, that the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance came out with, some of the project level support that the governance project is providing, the thought leadership and guidance at EIG. We're tapped into a lot of these different organizations and thereby able to integrate a lot of their thinking and kind of emerging best practice into the platform. So it's a super exciting time. And if you flip to the last slide, I'll close. We're right now, we're really excited about supporting a lot of this community-driven work that's emerging across the country on opportunity zones. We're really excited at a baseline level just to learn about what's happening. As Alex said, there's so much new stuff that's coming out every day. It's a really exciting time, and it's really amazing to be a part of a lot of this work that's happening on the ground. And obviously, we'd love to support the efforts that are emerging. So if you're curious about what we're doing, want to learn more, my email's on the screen there. Feel free to shoot me a note. Check out our website, or follow us on Twitter. We tweet occasionally, but it's a good way to stay in the loop about what we're doing. We're trying to get better on that. So yeah, thanks. And I think there's probably some Q&A now. So I'll stop talking, and Rachel, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. So we have a lot of questions coming in, so I want to make sure that we're saving time for them because we are probably about 10 minutes out from 4. So I guess just to you and Alex, just given the amount of, I would say real-time energy, sweat equity that you guys have both put into these efforts over the past a little under a year, which is, I think, probably pretty crazy for everyone to think about that it's only been a year. But by the end of 2019, what does success look like for you? Like, how would you define that, and what's it going to take to get there? Alex, I'll start with you.
Speaking for Opportunity Alabama, success for us looks like solving a lot of the initial challenges that we've kind of identified within the marketplace. So one, it's investment into actual operating companies, and which I think is really in line with what the statute was originally drafted for, intended for, to grow entrepreneurial and startup ecosystems in urban and rural areas. So more dollar values into those projects. 2, more local dollars into local projects, and seeing vehicles that can facilitate more local dollars into local projects that are going to pop up, I think, here in Alabama. Fun stuff coming around that, hopefully. And then 3, I think, really the data piece. It's we want Alabama to be a national leader in thought architecture around how to measure and track primary, secondary, and tertiary effects of opportunity zone investments. And because of the uniqueness of our pipeline, because we're providing capital introductions, because we're providing direct, basically like structuring advice, other technical assistance to project sponsors, we've been able to extract concessions from them, including basically the ability to collect whatever data we ask them for. So I anticipate that we'll be able to have a really, really rich data portal that we're going to align with Opportunity Exchange and be able to do some really cool sort of impact tracking and assessment work in conjunction with some national partners.
Awesome. Yeah, it's echoing a lot of similar themes for Alex. For Opportunity Exchange specifically, success is partnering with as many communities as possible to help advance local efforts that are happening on the ground and really be a supporter that provides infrastructure that's really needed to move the ball forward. A lot of folks need to stack hands to make this successful, and we hope to be one of the hands in that stack. At a more broad level, I think success on OZs at the end of the year, there's a lot of really great ideas out there, but that I think fall through the cracks at some piece in their way to actually getting shovels in the ground or jobs created in the community. And what I would love to see by the end of the year is a movement to more effectively help share best practice and move communities together down the path, so that as we learn one thing that works really well, we can quickly scale that and move that across geographies, so that it's easier for community-based projects that might just be an idea now to understand the different steps in the process they'll need to take to actually get to having investment come into their project and seeing work start to happen at that local level.
That's great. Alex and Peter, while you're still unmuted, there have been a few questions that have come through on the chat box as well, so I'm just going to throw them your way. So actually a couple for Opportunity Exchange and you, Peter. So can you talk a little bit more about the social impact metrics that you're tracking? We'll start with that.
Yeah, for sure. So 2 quick responses here. So one, we helped contribute to the development of the OZ framework, which is one of actually the links that's listed on the slide on the screen here, and are really excited about that starting point as a way to think about a common framework for tracking and articulating impact of OZ investments. So that's one approach that we're looking to integrate into the Opportunity Exchange and continue to develop. The other is there's a lot of really exciting work going on locally in a lot of these communities. Alex alluded to a lot of the impact tracking and really creative thought thinking that's going on in Alabama around how to measure and track primary, secondary, and tertiary impact effects of these projects. And I expect that over time, as a lot of this really creative thinking bubbles to the top, there will be really exciting opportunities to integrate that in various ways at scale into this platform that we're building. So one specific near term, and then one that's exciting but a little bit longer term.
Thanks. And Alex, I don't know if you have anything to add, because I know you also talked about a lot about impact tracking and working with communities to do that. Do you have any comments on how you're doing that? I'm sure that would be welcome as well.
So we just basically have an MOU with our project sponsor. We're getting a director of impact, full-time person who's starting with us in June. That, given the other constraints on my time, is going to be a godsend for us when it comes to actually building out the infrastructure around that. So I will defer all questions to June. How about that?
That sounds good. And then one more question specifically on Opportunity Exchange. Is there a cost to use it? And then there was also just generally interest about both of your business models for the, yeah. So I don't know if that's something you wanted to, we can take that offline or send more information around to the registrants as well, but if you wanted to comment briefly on that.
Yeah, sure. So for communities, the way that we work is just on a licensing basis. So we license our software on an annual basis, and we'll be happy to chat. It varies based on the size of your community and how many projects you're looking to have. We're happy to chat more about what that could look like if for the folks who are curious about that. Very open to share more information. Just shoot me a note and we can chat. For individual projects and investors, right now you can create an account and check out what we have, and our model's evolving on those fronts as well.
Awesome, thanks.
From the Alex side, we're purely private. We're pure private funding from various state and local philanthropies. We have not taken a single dollar yet of public investment from state, local, or federal level. So this is just local folks that care about economic development in a sustainable, catalytic way in Alabama.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much to you both as well. And I'd also welcome you to chime in on any, if you have any thoughts on the questions that are following as well. So next I'll turn to a few questions that have come through the chat box. Just related to kind of the broader opportunity zones landscape. So the first, and actually, again, Peter and Alex, you might have some interesting insight here in terms of how are investors kind of analyzing opportunity zones, especially as they're kind of looking at their deals, given the fact that a lot of these places have been traditionally sort of underserved or undercapitalized. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. I'm sure that would be really great to hear. I'll just start by saying a little bit about or echoing back to the prospectus that Rachel mentioned towards the beginning of this call. And we've heard that some investors are indeed kind of using those prospectuses to source deals and to, or at least, kind of become aware of them and get more information about them for the potential for investment. In addition to the prospectus model that a lot of cities are using, many are using kind of traditional RFIs as well, or, for requests for information or requests for proposals, especially those cities like Stockton, for example, is one that comes to mind, that owns a lot of land. So again, Rachel's point about site acquisition and kind of knowing what land and resources you have already at your disposal, especially as a city. They're doing that well and kind of putting out an RFI and an RFP for investors to look at their projects. And I think that they, as part of that, they've really outlined a lot of the assets that are currently at the disposal, of investors and of the city. So those are helpful kind of early models, I think, for investors to see how to really assess the assets that are already there in many of these communities and kind of projections for what's to come.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add to that. I think that what's important is that investors are looking at deals for IRR. I think that some investors are a little nervous to move outside of markets that they're not familiar with, but that was the whole point of the incentive in general, and I think it goes a lot to the points that Alex and Peter made around needing to build muscle memory in these communities and making sure that investment is attracted to those communities to get investors to feel comfortable. So, yeah.
So this is Alex. One brief add-on. I would suggest that investors are not one monolithic unit. So I'd say there's kind of 4 segments of investor in the marketplace right now. The first are kind of your national opportunity funds, and they have a certain return profile and a certain kind of market that they're looking at, normally market rate in larger markets. The second are sort of like impact-based opportunity funds, a lot of which are national or regional in scope, that are looking beyond traditional markets and then are offering sub-market rate capital. Third potential group are, I guess you can call them kind of like opportunistic investors, who could either be investors themselves or investor developers who have gain events and are looking to do projects. And that's, that kind of covers anything. That can be your local folks, it could be national folks, but that's where I think to a huge degree, whether it's via a prospectus, whether it's via the opportunity exchange, but having both available land and then teed up deals ready can be very helpful for that category in a way that's easily marketable. And then finally, local investors. And again, that's across the board. I mean, we're seeing deal structures that I don't think we would ever have seen otherwise on projects that might never have gotten done. But because there are local investors getting engaged, like that's where we're starting to see some growth there. Although that's, I think, the least developed category.
Great. And actually, to your point about, states or cities that have kind of teed up not only, land that they own, but also shovel-ready projects. So there was a question about a best practice example of a state or community that's doing that well. So I do want to just kind of shout out Maryland and Baltimore as two that, again, come top to mind of, those that are doing a lot of work. I mean, and of course, in addition to the communities that we've highlighted on the call here today, which are obviously serving as a best practice in their respects. But Maryland recently announced a package of about $56 million in additional incentives, and I think has done a really great job of putting together a state-based kind of connecting a portal, rather, to connect investors to projects that is really detailed, and I think does a great job of kind of showcasing what is out there and some of the shovel-ready projects that are open and available for investment. We saw that kind of reap rewards already with a brownfield redevelopment in Baltimore's, I think, called Bayview neighborhood, I want to say, that's close to the Johns Hopkins Medical Campus, but traditionally has been kind of very much underutilized, and now will become a large total rehab, essentially, of this brownfield into community resources like a grocery store and things like that. So that's really exciting to see that early investment, and I think a lot of that is because of the infrastructure that Maryland and Baltimore as well are building. For example, Baltimore has an Opportunity Zones coordinator that focuses specifically on this and figuring out how to get the community stakeholders, investors, et cetera, all at the table to make projects like this work. So that is one best practice example, in addition to the ones we talked about earlier today, that I would highlight for folks. So it's some additional questions related to, and I know we're coming up on, we actually are at 4 o'clock, so Eastern time. So folks have to jump off, totally understand, but we are happy to stay on for a few more minutes just to answer some of these final questions. If folks do have to hop off right now, I'll just do one quick reminder that we will be sending around the recording and the webinar slides afterward. We will aim to do that certainly before the end of this week. There's also been a lot. First of all, I am loving the networking that's happening in this chat box. It is fantastic. If you have not opened it up yet, do so. There's a lot of great resources that are being shared there, as well as folks that are looking for additional resources in their community. So please open that up. There's also been some requests for a list of attendees for the webinar. I'm happy to provide that as long as everyone is okay with that. It's hard to get kind of consensus over a webinar of 150 people. So I guess what I would say is, if you would not like your information shared, please email me. You should have received my email from yesterday in the reminder note that I sent. But if you don't see it, it's just Catherine@eig.org. So please send me a note if you would not like to be included, but I'd be happy to send that around just so that the conversation in this chat box can continue in real life. Great, so with that, we'll just move on to a couple of final questions here. So one is related to the regs and what is needed to get more private equity funds into the market versus some of the more kind of private real estate funds that we've been seeing which are dominating the market at the moment. So this just kind of gets back to my earlier point about needing the regulations to really allow funds to truly act as funds. So what we're not seeing kind of the multi-investment type funds come to maturation yet, and that's really a result of the fact that there's a few things. One is the timing, the lack of timing flexibility, I should say, around the initial deployment of capital for opportunity funds. It takes some time to put together a diverse set of portfolio investments, particularly for investing in operating businesses. And right now, folks feel like their hands are tied a bit to this kind of 180-day timeline as to when the first 90% asset test comes into effect. So we're really looking for some kind of either a safe harbor or some policy that would allow for some additional flexibility for investors to deploy capital. We're also looking for clarity as to whether the benefit is tied to an investor's stake in the investment itself or the asset, or if it's tied to the stake in the fund as intended by Congress. They wrote a letter that said that, so I feel like I can say that with some authority. Really that would, because if your benefit is tied to your stake in the investment itself, and that is acquired or sold or what have you, that may interrupt your 10-year benefit, which of course would be, detrimental and certainly not the intended impact here. So there are issues like that if the regulations are able to address them, then we certainly anticipate a lot more diversity of investment and investors. As Alex mentioned, it's not monolithic. So we certainly hope to see a lot more diversity of the types of investors coming into the marketplace and deploying their capital into businesses especially. So hope that answers that question. One more, actually, if Alex and Peter are still on, maybe you would have some insight into here too. The one is about structuring exits, so it's beneficial to both investors and communities. I know that we're looking for some additional clarity on exiting of the fund, but if you have some thoughts, if you've seen some interesting early models as to how to, again, structure an exit of a deal so that it also benefits the community in addition to providing that return for investment.
So this is Alex. I'll jump in here. In Birmingham, there's a couple funds that are exploring the idea of providing a community-centric group, whether that's a CDC, a local nonprofit, or another kind of community stakeholder, with sort of a membership in the general partner of the fund that can then get a carry, so that you're basically building community wealth via alongside the fund manager or the fund sponsor who's working on behalf of the limited partners. Great.
We've also heard a little bit about ESOPs, the employer-sponsored. I forget the acronym now, I'm sorry. Shouldn't have started spelling that out if I didn't know the last two. But essentially, I think, ownership, like an ownership model, essentially. So more or less that, once the kind of fund exits an investment, that the investment can somehow kind of come back to the employers or be owned by the community, things like that. I know this is actually also being talked about with regards to universities. The HBCU fund that Rachel mentioned, I think is thinking through how can they, if they're building student housing or student-focused housing, how can that become property of the university kind of at the end of the 10-year benefit. So I know that there's some interesting models related to that as well. Great, and then final thing is related to LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit, and how this might work given the fact that the timing and the incentives are a little mismatched. It's a great question, one that we're running up against quite frequently. We have seen this work in a couple of deals. I think the circumstances aligned really well, but you're right in that often they do not because of the just differences of the incentives. I know Rachel can talk a little bit more about that, but I think that that's why we're also really pushing for an emphasis. Of course, affordable housing is really necessary and important, but so is workforce housing. And it might be an opportunity to also, focus on some of that with opportunity fund dollars that aren't as reliant on kind of other sources of community development, capital, and tax credit programs.
Yeah, I was just out at Affordable Housing Finance Live earlier this week, where this was the exact topic of conversation was how are folks looking at leveraging the housing credit with opportunity zones, and are there other business models that we should be considering as it applies to housing and addressing affordability challenges. And really where I think a lot of folks ended up on the panel, but also in the room, was that yes, this can work on a deal-by-deal basis with the low-income housing tax credit, but because of timing issues and the nature of how you traditionally invest in low-income housing tax credit deals over a certain period of time, as opposed to just thinking it all at once, that there's not necessarily a consensus around how this is going to work moving forward, but in the meantime, seeing a real opportunity around financing workforce housing with opportunity zones equity, and some folks even thinking about how do you diversify your business model if you're a low-income housing tax credit developer. How are you diversifying to include workforce housing to take advantage of opportunity zones as an incentive, but also to help address some downward pressure on pricing and rents that could free up availability of more naturally occurring affordable housing. So market rate affordable is how other folks refer to it, for folks that otherwise would qualify for low-income housing tax credit projects, for them to move into. So it's sort of through workforce housing, providing some relief or taking some pressure off of the market writ large through supply economics.
All right, well, I think that those are all the questions that have come through the chat box. Thank you all so much again for joining us today. We will be circulating the webinar recording and slides afterward. I think that all of our contact information is listed on those slides, so feel free to get in touch with Rachel, myself, Alex, and Peter. And again, I will look to hear from anyone who would like to opt out of sending us their or having their contact information circulated, but I'm happy to circulate everyone who participated on this webinar as well later to the group. So thank you all again. We'd love to continue to hear from you about how things are progressing in your communities. So please keep in touch, and hopefully we will see you on the next webinar, in a few weeks or so. Thanks again.